A well of knowledge pouring into tributaries of society to keep the power of the Constitution alive and relevant. Justice Albie Sachs' lecture on the drafting of the Constitution and its impact on society took his audience through the past, whose effects are ubiquitous in the current society. In his talk, he remembered how important the mandate was to those who were appointed to draft the Constitution of the country, citing the voter turnout at the first democratic elections as the most significant mandate.
20 million people. The elections. You couldn't get a better mandate than that. And you couldn't get a more participatory process than that. 20 million people stood in lines for hours and hours and hours as equals for the first time, dropping that piece of paper as equals for the first time. I always mention the story of an elderly, ill African man in, I think it was now called Limpopo, it was then Northern Transvaal, who came to vote in a wheelbarrow because he wanted to vote before he died. It was hugely meaningful.
Sachs is adamant that no concessions were made, as is widely narrated in present-day South Africa. He explained that it required an enormous amount of thought to get the apartheid powers to surrender their power without war and avoid inheriting a country in ruins.
People speak about the liberation movement made huge concessions. Freedom of conscience, that's not a concession. The right to use your language, that's not a concession. The right not to be arbitrarily detained, that's not a concession. We didn't want to go back to the methods of apartheid. In a sense, and I always felt this was Oliver Tambo, it was so deep, he was such a deep, profound constitutionalist, that the whites in South Africa are too narrow, self-referential, limited in their vision to ever imagine South Africa belonging equally to everybody. They just can't even imagine it. They can only think in terms of racial groups and protecting the rights of racial groups, and so we've got to protect our minority rights. We African people who suffered so much in our bodies for being who we are, we believe it is possible for human beings to live together as equals, respecting each other.
His wife and manager of his digital library, the Albie Collection, to be launched in January next year to mark his 90th birthday, explained that the digital library is an effort to retain history.
The purpose of this lecture is to inspire the young people today. A lot of them grow up having not been exposed to apartheid, and that is what I guess people of my generation and older were involved with in the anti-apartheid movement, to create a society, not a boring society, but a society in which we didn't need to deal with the issues of apartheid, the oppression, the exclusions, the marginalization, etc. And young people today don't remember that it actually even happened. And I think what is important is for people like Albie to bring their stories to life and to share their experiences and explain what it really cost.
Some of the young lawyers and students who attended said the lecture gave them a better understanding of the Constitution.
I think coming from practice, I studied and finished my LLB in 2020. And then you still engage with the substantive law, but going into practice, you don't engage with the substantive law that much anymore. And this platform just reignited that hope and idealism.
To many people, the Constitution is something that's archaic, but as prospective lawyers, attorneys, and so forth, it's a big thing, you know, to us to see how we can make a difference in each other's lives or in the law and so forth. But more importantly, as a woman of color, somebody that looks like me, for representation-wise, we don't see many people that can relate or that we look similar to or look alike. So it's important for us to have these type of conversations.
What I think was the most important thing that I take away is that the Constitution is a living document, and it will adjust to the times, it will adjust as we go forward. So far it is doing that.
Sachs insists that it's time for South Africans to return to participatory democracy and realign themselves with the Constitution. He also cited the issue of gender-based violence as a constitutional matter to be challenged in line with the Constitution's guarantee of safety. Kamohelo Siekwi, SABC News, Bloemfontein.